Okay, so a couple different things. How I spend my day, you might ask, is I think a lot about. I wake up in the morning, I think, is outdoor recreation good for me? And there's some folks, and I probably shouldn't say this in front of, but I'm like, I should go out and ride my bike today or go climbing today. But instead, I come to work. So I think it is good for you. But I spend a lot of time thinking about like, what is outdoor recreation and is it good for you? So do we have any recreation enthusiasts in here? We not bikers? Yeah. But I know this is a biking town I've come to learn. I've only been here for this is the start of my second year, so still trying to figure it out, learn me a little bit. So yeah, and then also kind of thinking about narrowing down what do we mean by outdoor recreation? So it's really hard to define. So you can think about things like tennis. Is tennis, what do you think? Outdoor recreation? You think so? Yeah.
Yeah, that's a sport, yeah.
Right, yeah, so it gets a little bit murky what we're actually talking about. So typically think about things, the way I tend to categorize it is like the ball sports and things you would have played in high school. We don't typically think of as outdoor recreation. Yes, they're recreation that happens outside, but they fall more into like the sports category. And so if you were at a school like with a more traditional program, I guess you'd say, you might be studying sports management if you were thinking about like those types of activities. Whereas outdoor recreation, we tend to think of as the fun adventure things, backpacking, climbing, hiking, all these different things and love probably here since you're at the University of Wyoming. So I think about that, and then I also think a lot about like what does it do, particularly like what role does outdoor recreation play in our society? So more specifically, I think a lot about attitudes, characters, and beliefs. So I work at these programs or grew up a lot working at these programs that are like anybody take an Outward Bound or Knowles course, National Outdoor Leadership School course? No? Okay, so these are what we call adventure education programs. So their kind of purpose is to take people into the outdoor space and do different activities, introduce risk and uncertainty in a novel environment, and focus on things like attitude, characters, and beliefs. So Outward Bound specifically is what's known as a character education school. So they want specifically to build like mental toughness and grit and resilience in young people. And so I think a lot about that. I also think a lot about risk taking, how we make the outdoor recreation space safer. Like I do some work in avalanche education and avalanche decision making and avalanche terrain, how different technologies influence that. So like right now I have a paper in review about people who backcountry ski specifically. So outside of like a ski resort area. And if you have an avalanche beacon, which helps people find you if you're buried under the snow, or other types of technology like a smartphone. If you heard the term Kodak Courage, it's a little bit dated since nobody uses film anymore. But this is the concept that people will make more risky decisions for a photograph. So every year there's like 3 to 10 people that fall into the Grand Canyon because they're trying to take a cool photo. So you're like, oh, a little closer. And then we see bad things happen in the outdoors. So stuff like that. And then finally some health related stuff. So I got interested in this mental health idea. I was working a 21-day Outward Bound course, and this was like my 3rd or 4th year, and I had this young 14-year-old female student come up. She gets off the bus, and she's got these 3 parallel marks on her arm. I was like, oh, that's kind of weird. So I go over and I started talking to her, and I was like, hey, these marks are really interesting. How did you get those? And she was like, well, I was running through the neighborhood from a dog, and I jumped over a fence and scratched my arm. And I was like, oh, all right, well, that's plausible, I guess. But then, about 4 or 5 days later, we start to talk, and the nature of these courses, you know, you're in the backcountry suffering with these people, so the bonds that people form are really powerful and strong and lifelong sometimes. So, she and I had built a fair bit of rapport at this point, and I decided to ask her again. It's just she and I, she was, cleaning up the dishes or something in the kitchen. And I said, tell me again how you got those marks on your arm. And she said, well, actually, I cut myself. And she was referring to the not what we know now as non-suicidal self-injury. And I had no idea what to do with that young person. And so I called my supervisor, they called their supervisor. Nobody in the biggest adventure education company in the world, with the most trained staff, all this stuff, nobody had any idea what to do with this person. And so I kind of took it on myself at that moment to like, hey, if nobody else is going to figure this out, I better start figuring it out for myself. And so started doing some research and different things about mental health, specifically and physical health in the outdoors. So that's probably my biggest passion going on right now. And so I think a lot about too, our field gets criticized a lot for not having a lot of theories. So there's the main theory you probably know, or I hope you know, and that's that idea that when your skill level meets the challenge, you lose sense of time and space, you get lost in the activity. You know what that is? Yeah, flow. Yeah, so that's our main our main theory that we really put a lot of attention on. And part of my work has also been to bring this theory from the 80s and back into the play here. That's called attention restoration theory. You know this one? No? All right, it's pretty exciting. So there's this theory posits that there's two different types of attention. So there's directed attention. Right now you're using directed attention. You have to try to pay attention to the boring person up in the front of the room talking about theories from recreation that maybe you don't really care about. So you have to try to pay attention in this instance. So you probably use this a lot in grad school. Then there's this idea of effortless attention. So what's the hot new show right now? It's not, it used to be Game of Thrones, that was my reference. But I think it's a little dated. Now it's probably say yes to grass.
Rings of Power.
Rings of Power, okay. Mandalorian. Okay. So when you're at home watching fill in the blank show, you don't have to try to pay attention to that idea or to that show. So those are things like effortless attention. And so if you buy into this theory and concepts, there's a lot of different applications for this theory. One is, and this is a grad school hack that I actually found to be really helpful for me, that maybe you can use, is this idea that nature can help restore your ability to use your directed attention. So like I would experience this a lot, especially when I was writing my dissertation, I'd be banging away at the keyboard and then totally hit writer's block. I'd sit there and I'd stare at the little blinking cursor for half an hour, being lost in my thoughts or whatever. So when I realized I could use this to my advantage, I would then shut my computer lid, put my phone down and go walk in the woods. Even like 20 minutes, we found different research studies have suggested that that can help start to restore your directed attention, your ability to focus. And so what is it exactly about the natural landscape that helps you restore that directed attention? So does a walk across campus work in the same way as going for a hike out in Beaverville? I don't know. We don't know. But we think it's due to a couple of these different things. So this idea of being away, so the sense of escape, your demands of daily life. So that's why I put that cell phone down. So I'd leave it behind when I go on these walks. Couldn't get texts and email alerts and all those things. So part of it's just being away from the routine. Another part of it is fascination. So this is the ability of an environment to capture your attention effortlessly. I see this all the time. one of my pet peeves is working for these different adventure programs, teaching on the beach. Anybody ever taught like surf school or tide pooling at Outer Ed? No. Well, one of the most irritating things is you put your students, sit them down in the sand, they're facing the ocean, and then the waves are lapping, and they're not hearing a darn thing you're saying, because they're so focused on the waves or whatever, dolphins swimming out there. And so the natural landscape has this ability to to provide fascination, captures your attention without you having to try in any way. So then the third component of 4 is the extend. So this is the component that refers to the sense of scale of an environment. So you think about this, you might go walk up on the prairie or ride your bike out the schoolyard. And I always find this to be true for me. When I'm biking up, I'm more focused on like the bike riding and the movement. But when I turn around, I'm coming back towards town, you get that vista. And I notice I'm much less focused on riding the bike or the, mechanics and whatever. And I'm looking out at that landscape, the snowy range in the background, all those things. And so, if you ever wonder why, you would like those big grand vistas, this might explain part of that. So that's extent. And then finally, compatibility. So this is refers to the degree which environment meets the individual's needs and preferences. In other words, if you grew up in Manhattan and all of a sudden I plunked you into the wilderness in Yellowstone, you're probably not going to have a restorative experience. In other words, we think that the landscape needs to be somewhat compatible. You need to feel comfortable, calm, at ease, at peace in that space. And so that's an important component as well. So I'm curious, in this room, which would you prefer? For this nice hardwood forest or maybe a nice desert landscape? Raise your hand if you would rather go for a hike in the forest. Okay, how about the desert?
Without the road.
Yeah. Okay, yeah. So it's kind of nice. There's a lot of variety in the room and in life in general. And so yeah, it's nice that we live in a place where we can access a lot of different types of landscapes. So something to think about as you go forward. And so we really got to thinking about this idea when I was in grad school and shortly thereafter. And so we wanted to devise a study about some methodologies, how we might look at this thing. So weird thing about me is I did my master's and PhD at the same school. And at Indiana, you only had to take 4 classes in the Rec and Leisure department for your PhD. So all my other classes were in my minor area, which was inquiry methodologies, like how we know what we know, I guess. So I got really wrapped up in that idea, and that's how I came up with this study to do of this rappelling site. So I wanted to see, using kind of the framework of attention restoration theory, I wanted to see how these adventure activities cause stress and uncertainty, and then what elements specifically, when were students stressed the most and when were they most relaxed, and then also ultimately how that stress contributed to their learning environment. So we devised this study where we did 6 data collection times. In situ is just a fancy word for in the moment. Data collection for qualitative, and then data collection, and then we use electronic devices and biomarker research, which was somewhat novel to this area when we were doing this, and was pretty intensive. And so what we did was we had this class from the university. This was the core program at the university that we used for the students. And so they were in this semester-long program. And part of that was learning how to set up a rock climbing site and then go take people rock climbing and then also rappelling. And so we wanted to devise this study with that group because the educational outcomes were still how to do those activities, not necessarily, or how to set them up, not necessarily like a student experience. So in other words, we didn't want to do this with an outward bound group whose goal was like personal growth and development. That was a secondary goal for this program. Otherwise, this would be horribly invasive and it still was, invasive to the student experience. So we thought a lot about that with this research. And I'll be curious, I'll ask you at the end your thoughts on that piece. But yeah, this is kind of a picture of the overview. And so, yeah, we were relying on these different technologies that were coming about at this time, talking about like digital video capturing. So this was the right after the first edition of helmet mounted GoPros came out. So we used some of those, iPad surveys and different things like that. And then we were talking about using, so prior to this, the only way to measure cortisol was your urine. So cortisol, which we didn't want to do. Cortisol, you may know, is a stress hormone, and it's present always in your saliva too. And so they had recently, around 2000, developed a way to measure it in your saliva glands, and so you didn't have to go take a urine sample to measure cortisol. And so cortisol helps you particularly digest carbohydrates. So if you eat a big slice of bread, it's going to start to manifest in your saliva and break that down. And then also it manifests a lot in the fight, flight, or freeze situation. So if you are, think evolutionary, if you're hiking through the forest and you see a bear, your cortisol is going to spike tremendously, and it helps your body react to that situation. And so we thought about how adventure programs sort of mimic those types of fear or stress responses. And so the only other study we could find that had used another type of biomarker were these, and then this heart rate variability in beginning scuba divers. And so a little bit more, so yeah, just more succinctly. So we wanted to use several methods to use in situ data collection, measure biochemical changes and try to match those with self-report stress questionnaires that we used, and then look at the correlation between biochemicals and qualitative inquiry techniques to see if we could actually collect data in the activity. So this has been historically really difficult because people, if you're biking down a trail, the last thing you want to do is stop and fill out a survey. Yeah, recreation research is pretty hard to collect data for those types of reasons. Even harder if you think about like on a river or something like that. So here's what we used. We had iPads survey, which you're probably familiar with. These are the helmet mounted GoPros. So typically they face out. So we had to mess with the plastic mounting piece to flip them so they would capture the person's face. So we use facial recognition software. And then this was like first generation heart wrist monitors that did blood pressure, and then the salivary cortisol samples as well, which are a huge pain because you have to you need a lot. You can't just like spit onto a piece of paper. So the language we found was helpful was drool into the test tube. So if you say spit, you didn't get enough. And so the little tubes would have a little marker on them, and so they'd have to take this little straw and drool. And it was quite a bit. It's kind of hard for some people to get enough in there. But and then you have to keep them really cold. So we put them in a cooler with dry ice right away. And then we were camping at this place, so we bribed the state park that we were in to let us put them in their food storage cooler, which they were, yeah, probably broke some OSHA or health safety codes or whatever, but we made it work. And so I mentioned earlier there were 6 data collection times. We measured, we measured people the day before, a couple days before to establish a baseline measurements, and then we measured people in who's a repeller or a caver in here? Some folks. Okay, so basically you have a corral, and that's where you want the people to wait. So the corral's like to the right of this picture, all the students are sitting over there, they're drilling into the test tubes. And then we have the edge that refers to, you know, that moment right when you go over the cliff. So I know from just working in these courses and stuff, that's the moment where most people, if they're gonna panic, that's where they're gonna panic. You have to lean back on that rope and weight it with your full weight for the very first time. That's when people are, you know, really tense. So we wanted to capture that moment. So that was our edge data collection. And then you see here the middle, and that was pretty complicated. So I had to build a whole separate rope system. This is a researcher, can't tell, sitting on a wooden seat that I built. So it's just like a 2x6, and then we padded them with chairs, so that because they were going to sit there for a long period of time. And then this is one of the rappelling people, and then also the bottom. So one of the other things we had to control for was your daily diurnal cycle. So cortisol, like I was saying, it will manifest in your saliva naturally throughout the day. It typically spikes first thing in the morning when you wake up. So maybe you're more productive in the morning, different things. Your cortisol level might be a part of that reason. And so you can see here it spikes 6 a.m. and then sort of tapers off throughout the day. So with each data collection time, we had to control for that. So the way we did that was we collected data throughout the day on just a normal classroom day that we had, like 2 weeks or so before this trip. And we also did it the day before to see what type of anticipatory stress and anxiety people were going through before this trip, because they knew they were going to come on this trip and go rappelling. So we wanted to see how anxious are they. So, and then, so time 1 and time 2 were cortisol. Time 3 was all of these things. So blood pressure, the cuff would take a reading and wirelessly transmit that to the iPad. The cortisol, and then the perceived stress questionnaire, which is a short little quantitative instrument. And then while we interviewed them, we not only captured their responses via audio recording, but also their facial recognition, and then yeah, different things throughout the whole site. So here's a little video of just kind of how it all looked and worked. My friend put this together, and so we'll see if the answers fills in the gaps. So this is us setting up the site here. You can see it's a pretty tall cliff, and it definitely gets your attention, even if you're kind of a seasoned rappeller. These are students going back to the corral area, getting ready to take the first cortisol sample, setting up a rappel line here. And then this is getting one of the researchers in place on a different rope system. And then that's a good shot. So, oh, what's happened there? Things in the way. Getting a researcher in the way. Okay, and this is the edge interview process. So this guy's getting ready to interview this rappelling person. This is a safety backup person that we had in place, backing up this person so that they didn't execute the rappel properly. It would be able to stop their fall. And then he's also roped in, trying to get some data at the edge moment, that moment in time. It's one of the interviews happening. In the middle. And here's what the GoPro footage looked like. Okay, questions about the setup? That was a lot.
Did the interviewers know the repellers and did you account for that in the results?
Good question. They did not know them, no. Yeah, we were all kind of in the same department, so they may have heard their names, but didn't know them like personally. Yeah, good question.
You didn't take like a spit sample at each area, right? Like at the edge and right? It was just like in the beginning.
Right, yeah, we did it, let's see. Yeah, so we would have done it in the corral area where this is just the day of, in that corral area, and then again at the end of the experience. Yeah, good question. Anything else? Show you some results. Yeah.
Is there a specific amount of time that the cortisol needs to would go away? Like if you are really anxious at the beginning, at the edge, but then as soon as you realize that you're gonna be okay, like you say on there, if you physically calm down, how long does it take cortisol? Like, because I imagine that the repelling only takes, maybe 20 minutes, maybe less.
Yeah.
Would the cortisol have gone away? Kind of time to calm?
Why weren't you on the team with us? Because that's what we didn't account for. Yeah. So it does take, that's what we found, it did take some time. And so you can see here, the bottom of the rappel was the highest cortisol level. And so there, after we did the study and we realized this, we were like, wait, what? Why would that be happening? And so after that, yeah, we found one study that was like, oh yeah, it does take some time. And then since then, there have been more and more like confirmatory studies that show, yeah, it takes some time to for the measurement process to work. So yeah, that's a great question. So you can see here, this was pretty interesting. We didn't quite know how to account for, so the regular day was just in the classroom, and then the day, one day before the trip, we took those at the exact same time to account for that diurnal cycle in people, but the day before the trip was lower cortisol levels. We didn't really know how to account for that. And then, yeah, you can see it was elevated. The regular day and this day and the corral were all at the same time of day. And so you can see there was some anticipatory stress and anxiety going on. And then, yeah, definitely some after. I think what we found, I'd have to look at the literature again, but it takes like 30 minutes to flush out of your saliva after the stress response. So yeah, it's a great question. And so, like I said, the qualitative results were pretty interesting. So what stands out to you on this word cloud? Anyone jump out at you that's surprising? Boredom. Yeah. So yeah, I think that probably came about because they were like waiting their turn. Some of them had to wait for 20, 30 minutes. So I'm guessing that's where the boredom came from. Any other ones?
Those are great quotes.
Oh, I'm not sure. That might be a thing for when you code, it accidentally slips in there.
Social support.
Yeah, social support was interesting. So they talked a lot about being in the corral and being scared, but what got them through that was being in there with the other people and the other people saying, oh yeah, we got this, we can do this type of thing. And so, yeah, it's kind of an interesting finding for sure.
What researcher impact?
Yeah, so that was a big one they talked a lot about, and that the researcher, the process had a very significant impact on their experience, So a lot of them said, I wanted to learn how to rappel, but I had to focus on these other research oriented things. So that this research was really invasive for that reason. And for that reason, we added another day to the trip where we didn't do any research and they just rappelled and we worked on skills again. So the idea of the whole program is leadership development skills and tech skill development. So that's how we were able to I still feel a little bad of how invasive this was, but Anything else? I have no idea what time this ends or how long I've been talking. So, oh yeah,
Do you have any hypotheses on why the stress levels were, or the cortisol levels were lower the day before the trip? Could that be like anticipating the next day as like a outdoor rec day off, like helps de-stress them?
yeah, the weird part was it wasn't a day off. It was a day that should have been very stressful because they were like food packing and gear packing for this trip. So I don't know what was going on there. Yeah, anybody have any theories?
No. I was just wondering like what the biggest challenge you faced was then in your research and collecting those levels.
Yeah, one was definitely repel site safety. That was like paramount. And so if you saw in the video, there's a guy standing in like a yellow jacket. He had only one job, and that was safety. That was like his only focus, making sure that people walked within 10 feet of the cliff, they were clipped in, all those different things. The second one was so we did a dry run of this study back in Bloomington, and I didn't know that when you don't cover dry ice, it sublimates. And so we took a couple of like spit samples and put them in the cooler, dry ice was in there, drove back to campus, like 10 minutes, opened the cooler, all the ice was gone. So all those samples were useless. So that's why we had to like, doing a dry run was really beneficial, but also that's why we had to bribe that state park. I was like, hey, please let us put this in your freezer. Yeah, that was good. And then the other issue I was gonna talk about is the facial recognition technology was designed for like much more controlled environments. So think about like there's one that does emotional response and emotional elicitation, and it can read your facial expressions and kind of hypothesize what you're feeling. And that's what we were planning on using. And it did not work with the fisheye GoPro limits. And so basically that whole section. So that's why another reason I wanted to present on this, there's new software out there that will factor in that thing. So we're thinking about kind of like resuscitating these data and doing some more analysis with that fisheye thing. So those are the big three that were issues for sure. So we talked about the cortisol results. This is the heart rate variability results. So you can see heart rate was a much more reactive type of biomarker that we use to measure stress. So time 3 was that point on the edge. So you can see people's hearts were definitely pounding. With that, this has interesting implications that I don't exactly know what to do with, but like, does anybody know for private rafting trips down the Grand Canyon, #1 cause of death?
Heart attack?
Heart attack. Yeah. So sure there are implications I haven't thought about with that heart rate variability data. And then let's see. Finally, the quantitative instrument was the perceived stress questionnaire. It's a short 4-construct instrument that measures worries, demands, joys, and tensions. And this was the pre-post. So you can see worries and demands pre-post were up. Joy was less, as you might access, and tension was way higher. And so, yeah, we thought, kind of confirmed what the biomarker data was showing us. Yeah, it was costly, different things like that. Okay. So yeah, we thought these methods were a pretty interesting glimpse into participating in high challenge activities like rappelling and diving. We did show it was possible to do some biomarker research, although it was ridiculously complicated. But our field, is particularly outdoor recreation, has been plagued by self-report pre-post quantitative data analysis. So it was an interesting way to think about how we move away from that kind of stigma that is in the field. And since the study, other folks have picked up this mantle and done
a good job of figuring out other ways of measurement, which is good, different methodology. Whoops. And yeah. I want to include, so that's all about the study. Let me talk about this, and then we'll go for questions. That works. So, people ask me a lot what else I have going on. And so since this is might be my only time in front of the, most of the grad folks here, I want to talk about this. So I do have a project going right now with the lab school here on campus. See those kids sometimes out by Prexy's pasture? Yeah, so we have a lab school. So we're talking about, they do an outdoor education trips every year. And so we're talking about parental perceptions and their kids, how those might change pre and post outdoor education trips. I always have some mental health stuff going. So looking at anxiety causes and people coming to Keystone Science School. And then another study going on this concept of intolerance to uncertainty, sort of a partner to that concept of anxiety. Published a paper actually yesterday, I think submitted it for revision, outdoor professionals and burnout. So this feels notoriously difficult for working in. So you have to travel. I lived in my truck for like 10 years. Just bumming around, working different guiding outdoor ed jobs. So looking at burnout. And then yeah, e-learning is a public management tool. And then finally, last but not least, the Via Ferrata controversy. So that's a recreation development conflict controversy going on up in Lander, if you've heard about that. And that's it. Yeah.
With that outdoor recreation professionals and burnout, are you looking at like search and rescue professionals also?
We are not. Yeah, so we looked specifically at the experiential education industry. So most of the data came from like people that work at REI experiences. Like you can take a short trip with REI now, Outward Bound, Knowles, some outdoor ed schools, stuff like that. Yeah, we wanted to see why we saw during COVID. And this is probably the number one issue facing that field is hiring or retaining qualified staff. And during COVID, tons of experience walked out the door. And so we were wondering why, and it's there's a lot of factors like wages are not great, don't get benefits. You're out of contact for a long time, so it's hard on people's like personal relationships and stuff. So yeah, it was interesting. That'd be another sub study that would be interesting. For sure.
Especially with mental health.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Do you know the Responder Alliance?
Don't.
Their focus is mental health with that population and people that respond like globally to catastrophes. Might be a cool organization to check out. Yeah.
Back to your study, what types of questions did you ask during the interview? And like how succinct was the interview process throughout?
Yeah, it took about 5 minutes, I thought. So it would have been, you know, I don't have the instrument handy. But it would have been along these lines, questions to solicit these things like what's on your mind, what's on the impact, what do you feel? I have to pull that up. That's a good question. So I kind of forget. Did Ryan ever? He was the one shooting on the
Yes.
footage.
Yeah, I've
Okay.
seen parts of this before, but this is definitely more in depth.
Okay, yeah.
So it's good.
Yeah, that's a good question. He's our archivist. He backs up everything 2 million times. So to even find this presentation, I had to get him to give it to me.
What is the research you're doing with avalanche?
Yeah, that's a good question. So we want to look at, does technology influence your decision making? So in other words, if you and I are standing on a ridge and we're looking at skiing this chute that has a potential avalanche, and I have avalanche airbag and you don't, am I more likely to ski that line? Our data suggests yes, you are. And then, so with that sort of snowballed into this thing where there's a company that I'm consulting with that they're developing an app where the avalanche forecast goes into like an algorithm and overlays on a map. And then it tells you as the skier, like green, yellow or red, how safe this particular slope is to ski that particular day. So yeah, trying to cut down, because during COVID, when a bunch of people bought backcountry skiing gear because the resorts were closed, they had no avalanche education, so we saw this huge spike in avalanche related deaths. So we're trying to figure out, and like, I don't know if you've ever looked at like an avalanche forecast, but it's like a scientific paper. Like, yeah, you need an advanced degree to understand it. So this company's trying to make that information more accessible and easier to use. So yeah, the study looked specifically at like snowmobilers and skiers and the technology that they used and the decisions that they made, and perceptions of rescue time. Yeah, because people think it's like the movies. You get into an avalanche, you click that SOS button on your new iPhone, and the helicopter will be there. And yeah, it's definitely not the case. So people had this really skewed vision of how the avalanche stuff, the rescue stuff would work. Paper forthcoming in the Journal of Leisure Research. I can send it out if you like. I have not, yeah, what time is this thing in?
It's technically, 1:20 is the official,
Okay.
50.
Okay. All right. Anything else?
One maybe.
Yeah.
I don't remember how many students you said you were working with, but it looked like you might have had 2 rappel students.
Yeah.
How did you, prompt your facilitators so that they're keeping their instructions the same? And you think about doing like instructors teaching how to repel different ways to see if that impacted stress levels?
No, we didn't think about the different techniques. That'd be an interesting follow-up study. We had we did have a pre-trip meeting where you saw the woman who was the backup belayer. So that her job was to get the rappel going. And so you know, if you've worked these sites, each person's a little bit different. Like you know, you have a lot of people will keep their feet really narrow as they rappel off the edge. So you gotta thumb the spread. So that part was totally unstandardized. The research part, though, we did have a really strict semi-structured interview questionnaire that those people were instructed to follow like to the T. So that's how we maintain the the difference between the two sites. We might have had it. No, I think we had 2. Yeah, that's a good question though.
Just curious if the researchers that are participating in the interviewing have also repelled, or if they were nervous themselves. That was the thing.
Yeah, they were nervous. They had all repelled, but they were nervous because they didn't repel. I lowered them. And so they had, like no control, and that freaked a lot of them out because they were used to repelling. And then, but once they got like in the position in the seat, they said it was.
Did they have time before they met the first students? I would imagine just the reaction if you see a researcher being nervous, thinking about nervous, or if you see a researcher very calmly sitting in the middle of the cliff, then it would make you calm maybe until they.
Yeah, I know, a lot of confounding variables. Sure. Hard to control, but yeah, that's a good question. All right, well, there's my email if you want. Oh, was it? If you want to turn it on. Yeah, somebody can say I'll come around. Thanks for coming. All right.
Yeah, you said it.